The first time I caught Karen Wilcox from the HOA peeking over my fence, I figured she was just nosy. Typical HOA busybody behavior. I didn't think much of it until the morning I found a rusted animal trap hidden behind my rose bushes right where my dog, Bandit, loved to dig. I stood there, heart-pounding, staring at the metal jaws waiting to snap shut. Bandit, a goofy golden retriever, wagged his tail next to me, completely unaware how close he had come to disaster. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," I muttered, pulling out my phone. Before I could even call the police, I heard Karen's shrill voice from the sidewalk. "Maybe if you kept your mud in line, you wouldn't have to worry about accidents." I spun around. There she was, arms crossed, a smug little wrinkle crinkling her forehead. Her tacky sun hat and oversized sunglasses made her look like some cartoon villain. "You put a trap in my yard?" I said, stepping toward her. My voice was low, dangerous. "I placed a deterrent," Karen sniffed. "You signed the HOA pet agreement, Trevor Kane. Your dog is a menace." Bandit barked once, wagging harder like he thought this was a game. I took a deep breath, snapping a few clear pictures of the trap, Bandit, and Karen standing there like she had just won a prize. Then I dialed the police. Karen's face paled a little when she realized I wasn't bluffing. "You're really calling them?" "Over this," she said, her voice jumping an octave. "Yep," I said, keeping my camera on her. "And you're going to explain to them exactly why you think it's okay to set illegal traps on private property." Karen huffed and turned on her heel, stomping back toward her golf cart, the one emblazoned with the HOA logo like she was some kind of sheriff. "Good luck proving anything," she called over her shoulder. "The HOA backs me up." I just smiled grimly. "We'll see about that." Bandit barked again. This time it sounded like he was laughing. By the time Officer Ramirez pulled up, the trap was already sealed inside a plastic evidence bag, and Bandit was safely inside the house with a peanut butter bone bigger than his head. Ramirez adjusted his sunglasses as he approached. "Mr. Kane?" "Right here," I said, meeting him halfway down the driveway. I handed over my phone, still open to the photos I had taken. "It's all documented." She admitted it in front of me. He scrolled through the pictures, his jaw tightening. "You're lucky your dog didn't get hurt. Setting a device like this on private property? That's a felony in this state." I nodded grimly. "She thinks she's above the law because she's with the HOA. He raised an eyebrow. "We'll see what the district attorney thinks about that." While he took my statement, a few neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, pretending to trim hedges or check mailboxes. Word traveled fast around here, and nothing stirred up a crowd like the chance to watch Karen get hauled over the coals. Ramirez radioed for backup, explaining that the incident involved an illegal trap and a potential ongoing threat. Within minutes, another cruiser arrived and 2 officers headed straight for Karen's house, which sat catty-corner across the street. I watched from my porch, arms crossed. Karen answered the door looking flustered, clutching a neon-pink clipboard like it was a shield. One officer spoke to her quietly while the other slipped on gloves and started inspecting her front yard. From my vantage point, I saw him spot something under the hedges. He pulled out a second trap. Ramirez caught my eye and gave a small nod. "Looks like she's been busy." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The officers spoke with her for several minutes before one of them produced a pair of handcuffs. Karen's shriek echoed down the street as they cuffed her right there on her perfectly manicured lawn. "You can't do this. I have rights. I'm on the HOA board," she howled, struggling against the officer's grip. "You're under arrest for trespassing, animal cruelty, and unlawful setting of trapping devices," Ramirez said calmly. "You can explain yourself to the judge." As they led her toward the cruiser, she twisted her neck to glare at me. "This isn't over, Kane. I'll have the whole HOA coming after you." I didn't flinch. "You're gonna be too busy explaining yourself in court to worry about me." The door slammed behind her, muffling her shrieks. The cruiser pulled away, the flashing lights bouncing off the houses like a warning. The neighborhood stood frozen for a long moment. Then Mrs. Delaney from 2 houses down stepped off her porch and started clapping, slow and deliberate. One by one, others joined in, until it sounded like the entire block was applauding. I gave a small wave and headed back inside, heart pounding with a fierce satisfaction. But I knew it wasn't over. 2 days later, a letter showed up taped to my door. No envelope, no stamp. Just a single sheet of paper with the HOA masthead and a threatening paragraph demanding I attend an emergency disciplinary hearing for creating a hostile neighborhood environment. I held the paper between 2 fingers like it might bite me. Bandit barked once, sensing my mood. "I know, bud," I said. "Looks like they're doubling down." I spent the rest of the evening digging through my files. When I bought this house 3 years ago, I made sure to get a copy of the HOA's charter and bylaws. I wasn't about to let a bunch of petty tyrants chase me out of my own property. The next morning, I showed up at the HOA clubhouse with a manila folder under one arm and a GoPro clipped to my jacket. The camera's red light blinked steadily. Inside, the room was already packed. Most of the HOA board sat at a long folding table, looking self-important and stiff. Karen's absence was glaring. In her place sat a weaselly man with slicked back hair and a tight-lipped smile. "Mr. Kane," he said, steepling his fingers. "We're here today to address your unacceptable behavior toward Ms. Wilcox and the HOA. I didn't sit. I didn't smile. Is this meeting being recorded?" I asked. The weasel's smile faltered. "No, good thing I'm recording it then," I said, tapping the GoPro. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. The weasel cleared his throat. "Your confrontational attitude is exactly why you're being sanctioned." I opened my folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers. This is a copy of the HOA's bylaws. Section 12, subsection D, clearly states that any disciplinary action must involve impartial mediation by a third party. You didn't notify me of mediation. You didn't offer me an appeal. You violated your own rules. Murmurs rippled through the room. And, I continued, flipping to another page, the HOA has no authority to override criminal investigations. Karen Wilcox is currently facing felony charges. Any disciplinary action on her behalf constitutes obstruction. The weasel's face turned a shade redder than a ripe tomato. I dropped the final bomb. Additionally, I've filed a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's Office for HOA misconduct and abuse of power. So unless you want to add state investigation to your list of problems, I suggest you drop this little kangaroo court and focus on cleaning up your own mess. Silence. The weasel leaned back in his chair, clearly calculating. Finally, he forced a brittle smile. "There must have been a misunderstanding," he said. "We'll review the situation internally." I nodded once. "You do that." Without waiting for dismissal, I turned and walked out. By the time I got home, there were already whispers. Mrs. Delaney waved me down to tell me that several neighbors were planning to call for a full audit of the HOA's finances. Apparently, someone finally noticed that the new beautification project had cost 10 times more than it should have, and Karen's brother-in-law owned the contracting company. Funny how people suddenly started paying attention when things got personal. Later that evening, Ramirez called to give me an update. Karen had been formally charged with 2 counts of animal cruelty and 1 count of criminal trespassing. Her bail conditions forbade her from setting foot on HOA property or contacting any residents involved in the case. "That includes you, by the way," Ramirez said. "If she tries anything, call us immediately." I thanked him and hung up, feeling a weight lift off my chest. Bandit jumped onto the couch beside me, tail thumping. "We're not out of the woods yet, buddy," I said, scratching behind his ears. "But we're winning." I wasn't naive. I knew the HOA wouldn't give up easily. Power like theirs didn't die quietly. But now I had the law on my side, and more importantly, I had the neighborhood waking up. And if they thought I was going to roll over, they had another thing coming. The next morning, I woke to the low rumble of trucks outside. I pulled back the curtain and watched as a crew in neon vests unloaded pallets of sod and stacks of bricks onto the clubhouse lawn. A heavy-set man with a clipboard barked orders, while another crew member painted lines across the grass. Bandit whined at the window, sensing my tension. I dressed quickly and headed out. As I crossed the street, I caught sight of Mrs. Delaney and Mr. Price from down the block watching from their porches. Their expressions were wary. The man with the clipboard spotted me and waved. "Hey, you the homeowner rep?" I frowned. "No. What's going on?" He checked his papers. "Work order from the HOA. Emergency landscaping project. Whole courtyard's getting gutted and redone. Paid in full up front." I stiffened. "Paid by who?" He flipped to another page. "Payment came through yesterday. HOA account. Looks like it was authorized by someone named Karen Wilcox." My stomach dropped. "She's under criminal investigation. She doesn't have authority to approve anything." The man scratched his head. "Buddy, I just plant the trees. You got a problem, take it up with the office." I thanked him curtly and turned away, pulling out my phone. The HOA board wasn't just trying to save face, they were trying to burn through the budget before anyone could audit them. If they drained the accounts, there'd be nothing left to expose. I called Officer Ramirez immediately. He answered on the second ring. "Kane? What's up?" I explained the situation in clipped, careful words. He didn't hesitate. "That's financial tampering. I'll notify the detective handling the case. Keep everyone away from the worksite if you can. We'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up and turned back toward the workers. I knew I couldn't physically stop them, but I didn't have to. I just had to stall. I approached the foreman again. "Listen, I just got off the phone with the police. They're investigating the HOA for financial misconduct. If you go ahead with this project, you could be involved in an active crime scene." He paled. "No one told me that." "They wouldn't," I said flatly. "But if you want to explain to a judge why you bulldozed evidence, be my guest." He muttered something under his breath and barked at his crew to stand down. The workers dropped their tools and milled around uncertainly. True to his word, Ramirez arrived minutes later, sirens off but lights flashing. 2 unmarked cars followed, and a woman in a dark blazer stepped out, flashing a badge. "Special investigator," judging from the way the officers deferred to her. She introduced herself briskly as Detective Morales. "Mr. Kane, you contacted us?" she said, pulling out a notepad. I nodded. "They're trying to spend down the HOA's funds before the audit." She scribbled something quickly. "Good call. We're freezing the HOA's accounts immediately. Any idea who else might be involved besides Wilcox?" I hesitated, then said the acting board, especially the treasurer, Greg Moffat. He's the one running the disciplinary hearing yesterday. Morales' eyes gleamed. "Perfect. We've had our eye on him for a while." She turned to Ramirez. "Secure the site. Start interviewing the workers. No one touches a thing until we get warrants." As they moved into action, I drifted back toward my house. A few neighbors approached cautiously. Mrs. Delaney looked worried. "What's happening?" she asked, voice low. "They're investigating the HOA for financial crimes," I said. "Looks like it wasn't just Karen." Mr. Price whistled softly. "About time someone took them down." Over the next few hours, the neighborhood transformed into something out of a crime drama. Officers taped off the clubhouse lawn and set up folding tables where they interviewed workers. A city attorney arrived to oversee the account freeze, and a forensic accountant started digging through the HOA's books. I stayed back, watching, documenting everything with my GoPro. Late that afternoon, Ramirez walked over, fatigue lining his face. "Good news," he said. "We got approval to execute search warrants at the homes of several board members. Turns out this wasn't just about landscaping." I raised an eyebrow. "What else?" "Kickbacks, embezzlement, even forgery. They've been cooking the books for years." My jaw tightened. "How bad is it?" Ramirez smiled grimly. "That enough that half of them are going to need very good lawyers." That evening, news vans rolled into the subdivision. Reporters set up camp outside the clubhouse, broadcasting live while the forensic teams loaded box after box of documents into evidence vans. I caught snippets of the news anchors talking corruption in local HOA exposed, residents fight back against board misconduct, whistleblower homeowner leads to criminal investigation. I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. Not just for me, but for everyone who had been steamrolled by this HOA for years. The next day brought even bigger fireworks. A city councilwoman showed up in a tailored suit, flanked by aides and security. She addressed the growing crowd of neighbors gathered under the oak trees near the clubhouse. "We are placing this HOA under state oversight effective immediately," she announced. "An independent administrator will manage all operations until new elections can be held. Furthermore, residents harmed by the HOA's misconduct may be eligible for restitution." Gasps and cheers broke out around me. Bandit barked once from the porch, tail wagging furiously. The councilwoman continued, "We owe a debt of gratitude to Mr. Trevor Kane, whose vigilance and courage brought these abuses to light. This community deserves better, and starting today, you will have it." I felt my face flush as dozens of eyes turned toward me, some clapping, others nodding with respect. I wasn't used to being the center of attention, but I gave a small wave. Afterward, Mrs. Delaney approached, her eyes bright. "They're saying you saved the whole neighborhood," she said. I chuckled. "I just did what anyone should have done." Mr. Price joined us, shaking his head. "Maybe. But you were the only one who stood up when it mattered." The next few days were a whirlwind. Investigators continued combing through records. Arrests were made quietly but steadily. Greg Moffat, the treasurer, was led away in cuffs early one morning. Another board member fled the state but was picked up 2 counties over. The independent administrator, a no-nonsense woman named Ms. Patel, held a town hall meeting on the clubhouse lawn. I sat near the front as she laid out the plan: full transparency, regular public meetings, and a complete overhaul of the HOA's structure. The best part? The abusive rules Karen and her cronies had rammed through were being repealed one by one. Ms. Patel finished her speech and opened the floor for questions. When it was my turn, I stood and asked the one thing weighing on my mind. "How do we make sure this never happens again?" She smiled warmly. "We start by remembering that HOA boards work for the residents, not the other way around. And we make sure people like you stay involved." I nodded slowly. Maybe it was time I stopped just fighting fires and started helping rebuild. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the grass, Bandit trotted over, tongue lolling. I scratched his head and looked around at my neighbors. Really looked. For the first time since moving here, I saw a community instead of a battlefield. It wasn't over. There would be elections, new bylaws, long meetings where people argued over budgets and landscaping. But it would be ours. And no HOA bully would ever trap us again. 2 weeks after the arrests, the neighborhood felt different. Lighter somehow. Kids played on the sidewalks again without parents shooting anxious glances toward the clubhouse. People started planting flowers, repainting shutters, even hosting block parties, things that had been unthinkable under the old regime. One afternoon, I was repairing a loose board on my backyard fence when I heard a cautious voice call out, "Mr. Kane." I set down my drill and turned to see Ms. Patel approaching, a leather-bound folder tucked under one arm. She wore jeans and a simple navy shirt, a far cry from the buttoned-up suit she had worn the day she took over. "Got a minute?" she asked. "Sure," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. She glanced around, lowering her voice. "We found something else during the audit." I straightened, immediately alert. "What kind of something?" She opened the folder, revealing a series of invoices and bank statements, all stamped with HOA letterhead. But the names on the vendor lines caught my eye. They weren't landscaping companies or maintenance crews. They were shell corporations' names that sounded real, but when I looked closer, were nothing but P.O. boxes in strip malls 2 counties over. "They were laundering money," I said under my breath. Ms. Patel nodded grimly. "Over $200,000 diverted into fake contracts over the last 5 years. And that's just what we can prove so far." I shook my head in disbelief. No wonder they fought so hard to hang onto control. She closed the folder carefully. "We've handed everything over to the district attorney's office. There's going to be a grand jury." A hollow feeling settled in my chest. What about the residents who paid into this mess? Are they getting anything back? "We're working on it," she said. "It'll take time, but restitution is part of the plan." As she left, I leaned against the fence, staring out across the yards. It wasn't just about one bad neighbor with too much free time. This had been a full-blown operation, hiding in plain sight, feeding off people's trust and fear. That evening, I attended the first open forum meeting under the new administration. The community center was packed, standing room only. Miss Patel stood at the front alongside the councilwoman who had returned to oversee the transition. Instead of rows of rigid chairs like before, the seating was arranged in a circle. No podiums, no microphones. Just neighbors talking to neighbors. Ms. Patel addressed the group. We've initiated legal proceedings to recover stolen funds. In the meantime, we're suspending all non-essential HOA fees. No new fines, no surprise assessments. A wave of relief rippled through the room. An older gentleman I hadn't met before raised his hand. What about the people who were targeted unfairly? The councilwoman spoke then, her voice steady. If you were fined, penalized, or harassed without due process, you are entitled to file a grievance. Each case will be reviewed by an independent panel, not the HOA board. A woman near the back stood up. And the new elections? When do we get to vote? Ms. Patel smiled. 60 days from today. Every homeowner will have a voice. No more closed-door appointments. The meeting continued late into the night, but for the first time, people stayed because they wanted to, not because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't. When I finally headed home, Bandit greeted me at the door with a wagging tail and a stuffed toy clutched in his jaws. I knelt down and ruffled his fur. We did it, buddy, I said quietly. We actually did it. The next morning, I was surprised to find a plain white envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a handwritten note from Ms. Patel. Thank you for leading the charge when no one else could. You didn't just save your home. You saved all of ours. Attached was a certificate officially naming me the community liaison for the interim HOA administration. It wasn't a title I ever expected or wanted, but I understood the importance of it now. I spent the next several weeks helping organize neighborhood cleanups, setting up real community watch programs, and even helping draft a new set of bylaws that emphasized transparency and limited board member powers. During one of our neighborhood BBQs, an elderly woman named Mrs. Jensen pulled me aside. You know, she said with a twinkle in her eye Karen used to make us measure our grass with a ruler. If it was over 2 inches, she'd fine us. I laughed, shaking my head. Not anymore. She patted my arm. You brought back our freedom. Don't ever let them take it again. I promised her I wouldn't. The grand jury convened a month later. Thanks to the mountain of evidence collected by the investigators and the testimonies from over 30 residents, the indictments came down hard. Karen faced charges not just for animal cruelty and trespassing, but also conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. Her bail was revoked after she was caught trying to intimidate witnesses through anonymous letters. Greg Moffat and 3 other board members took plea deals in exchange for their cooperation against Karen. But they weren't getting off easy. Part of their deal included full restitution payments to the HOA and permanent bans from serving on any homeowners association board in the state. The day Karen's mugshot hit the evening news, the neighborhood threw an impromptu block party. Someone set up speakers and blasted classic rock, kids ran through sprinklers, and the air smelled like grilled burgers and fresh grass. Standing there with a paper plate of ribs in one hand and Bandit's leash in the other, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. The new elections went off without a hitch. Voter turnout was nearly unanimous, and for the first time, the board was made up of people who actually lived on the street, people who cared about more than just lawn colors and mailbox designs. I declined a formal position on the board, preferring to stay in my liaison role, but I made it clear, if corruption ever tried to creep back in, I'd be the first one knocking on doors with a clipboard and a GoPro. One evening, months later, I found myself sitting on my porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Bandit lay asleep at my feet, snoring softly. Mrs. Delaney wandered by with her little terrier, waving as she passed. Neighborhoods never look better, she called out. Feels better too, I said. She grinned. You ever think about running for city council? I laughed. One battle at a time. But as I leaned back in my chair, watching the kids play kickball in the cul-de-sac, I realized something. Sometimes it only takes one person willing to dig in, stand firm, and say enough. And sometimes when you do, the whole world shifts with you. Bandit stirred, thumping his tail against the porch. Yeah, buddy, I said softly. We're home now. For good.